Currently, the US sources much of its battery-grade nickel from Canada, Norway, Australia, and Finland, but production capacity is not growing at nearly the same rate as demand forecasts. Nickel is a key component of most lithium-ion batteries. The more nickel, the more energy density, and with the EV boom, demand for nickel is on the rise. But that also means that we're headed towards a shortage of the type of high-grade nickel that's needed for EV batteries. Russia has a lot of this nickel, and amidst its invasion of Ukraine, prices have soared to record highs amidst fears of supply disruptions.
Any mining companies out there, please mine more nickel. Tesla will give you a giant contract for a long period of time if you mine nickel efficiently and in an environmentally sensitive way.
And though the proposed mine is years away from production, Talon has already secured a supply deal with Tesla, worth around $1.5 billion, to get its nickel into EV batteries.
In this video, we discuss the missing puzzle piece in the transition to electric vehicles: raw materials. This is the one thing that will both simultaneously suffocate EV startups and legacy automotive manufacturers, leading most to bankruptcy, while simultaneously allowing Tesla to extend its unassailable lead and continuing to embarrass the entire automotive industry. This is a tale of one winner and many losers. This is a story juxtaposing intelligence, awareness, foresight, and planning with blindness, stupidity, complacency, and a death wish. We are at a major fork in the road, and if you haven't figured it out already, if your name ain't Tesla, you really are forked. So, let's get into it. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoy these videos, there's a bunch of ways you can support the channel, access exclusive content and perks, and get some free stocks and crypto. Check out the links in the pinned comment below. You can get 2 free stocks with Webull, a free stock with Stake, free Bitcoin with Coinbase, and free Bitcoin with BlockFi, and the BlockFi Bitcoin Rewards credit card. You can also pick up some Tesla, Elon, and investment themed merch in the merch store. If you want to take it to the next level, join thousands of members on Patreon to gain exclusive access to over 100 Q&A videos, loads of exclusive content, exclusive access to my up-to-date 10-year Tesla stock price targets, and even access my Tesla valuation model at the investor support level and above. So check out the links in the pinned comment below, and thanks for your support. I'll try not to interrupt too much here. I think CNBS have done a pretty good job of explaining what's going on. But as we watch this, I just want to remind everybody, Tesla was the company back in 2014 who had the foresight, the awareness, the insight to know demand for electric vehicles would increase enormously as the costs came down. In 2014, literally 8 years ago, almost a decade ago, Tesla announced the Gigafactory in Nevada, saying that they plan to be producing around 500,000 electric vehicles per year in 2020, and therefore they would need an enormous amount of batteries. And what goes in batteries? Raw materials. Of course, the entire industry laughed at Tesla back in 2014, and well, guess what? In 2020, they delivered about 500,000 vehicles. Turns out they were right, everyone else was wrong, and now they are really, and I want to underscore this, really fucked. And now, almost a decade later, the entire automotive industry is scrambling because they didn't think, they weren't aware, they had no foresight. I mean, they're just fucking dumb, and now they'll be paying the ultimate price in more ways than one.
Tamarack, Minnesota, population 94, could become the site of a new domestic nickel mine, a rarity in the US. Here, Talon Metals and Rio Tinto, one of the world's largest mining companies, are developing plans for the project. And though the proposed mine is years away from production, Talon has already secured a supply deal with Tesla, worth around $1.5 billion, to get its nickel into EV batteries.
Riddle me this. Why is it that Tesla is the company with a $1.5 billion contract locked in for long-term supply of a critical material with a company whose mine is years away from commencing production of said material? Why doesn't General Motors or Ford or Volkswagen or Toyota have this $1.5 billion supply contract on a critical material? Your guess is as good as mine, and well, my guess is that Tesla has a brain, a functional brain, which is also regularly used, which is probably more than can be said for the entire legacy automotive industry and maybe some of the EV startups as well.
I want to be able to say that, hey, there's a Tesla driving down the road and it's actually got Tamarack US nickel in it. That's my dream. That's what I like to do.
Nickel is a key component of most lithium-ion batteries. The more nickel, the more energy density. And with the EV boom, demand for nickel is on the rise.
Over time, that trend towards increasing energy density has tended to push the nickel content up in the cell. And really, when we look to the future, we're heading towards 90% of the cathode being nickel for certain cell types.
But that also means that we're headed towards a shortage of the type of high-grade nickel that's needed for EV batteries. Russia has a lot of this nickel, and amidst its invasion of Ukraine, prices have soared to record highs amidst fears of supply disruptions. The London Metal Exchange even had to suspend nickel trading after an unprecedented 250% price spike in early March. But the US itself is short on resources. The Eagle Mine in Michigan is the nation's only primary nickel mine, but it's expected to close in 2025. That means that Tamarack is the only high-grade, undeveloped nickel reserve that we know about in the U.S. today. The project pipeline for these mines has largely dried up elsewhere, and that has some automakers begging for help.
Any mining companies out there, please mine more nickel. Tesla will give you a giant contract for a long period of time if you mine nickel efficiently and in an environmentally sensitive way.
And true to their word, $1.5 billion contract locked in as a result of this cry for help on the earnings call back in mid-2020. You know what Ford, General Motors, Volkswagen, Toyota, Hyundai, Kia and so on were saying on their earnings call around the same time? Nothing to do with batteries or electric vehicles or materials or anything, because ICE vehicles are the future and we'll still be making those in 2035 according to our own plans. Elon Musk's cry for help on the Tesla earnings call took place July 22nd, 2020. We're currently looking at the price of nickel per tonne. Fancy that. Now, where exactly was this cry for help? Somewhere around here. Nickel around $15,000, $16,000 per tonne. The agreement was announced publicly on the 10th of January 2022. What was the price of nickel on the 10th of January 2022? Just out of interest. I mean, you might assume there's probably some form of lock-in in terms of the price of nickel at that point in time. There's probably a clause for variation. But no question, Tesla's got a pretty good deal on this. That's what happens when you commit to buying $1.5 billion of something. You get a bit of a discount. This is the 10th of January. Nickel was around $23,000 per tonne. The nickel price has since headed to the moon, then come back a little bit towards reality, but still close to $40,000 per tonne. In other words, the price of nickel has almost doubled since Tesla locked in their long-term supply contract. Rip everyone who isn't Tesla. Now, just one final point I'd like to make before we continue. If you put yourselves in the shoes of a mining company, somebody who can actually supply the raw materials necessary, and you're making the decision, who do we sign this gigantic, ultra long-term supply contract with? The company whose CEO has been begging on earnings calls going back a few years, the company who's already produced over 2 million electric vehicles and has a clear track record of needing these materials and is in a very strong financial situation, making enormous profits on every vehicle sold with insane wait times. In other words, a proven track record. They're reliable. They'll follow through. They're not going bankrupt tomorrow. They will actually buy this material at the price for the period of time that we've agreed upon. Are you more likely to agree to supply company A, that would be Tesla, or are you more likely to take a chance on a company like Government Motors, who last went bankrupt a little over a decade ago, who sold 26 electric vehicles last quarter in the United States? All talk and no walk. Are you going to take a chance on a company who's likely to go bankrupt? Are you going to take a chance on a company who doesn't have any proven track record of requiring any meaningful volume of this material whatsoever? Not unless you're a brain-dead fucking moron, and this is a bit of a problem. When Tesla approaches a mining company, when Tesla's CEO on the earnings call says, hey guys, we desperately need XYZ material and we'll buy literally as much as you can give us, Tesla has an unfair advantage, one that they've earned, but it's now at a point where it really is unfair. Let me come at this from a different angle. I think I said that last night, different context. Anyway, let's give a more relatable example. Imagine for a moment, guys, which is 95% of the audience, that you're casually dating a woman. She's also seeing one or two other guys. Imagine for a moment in a hypothetical scenario, you currently are 35 years old and still live in your mother's basement. You claim you're ambitious. You claim you're confident. You claim in the future you'll earn a good income. You claim that you'll be able to make her feel safe and comfortable, take care of all of her needs so she doesn't need to worry about a thing. You currently have a fapping addiction, you're morbidly obese, you've got nothing going for you, and you're unemployed. Now you can plead with this woman, hey, look, forget those other guys that you're seeing who are multimillionaires, earning great incomes, looking after their health, they're smart, intelligent, funny, they take care of it. Those guys, forget them. I guarantee you that in the future, I promise that I'll be even better. Just please take a chance on me. What do you think the odds are of this woman deciding to take you at your word, take a huge risk, make a massive bet on you, assuming you'll come good on your potential promises without any actual evidence that you'll do so? What are the odds that she'll pick you, take a huge risk on your promises versus just picking the obvious clear winner who's provided evidence of his winning ability over an extended period of time? Tesla is the guy who's got his shit sorted. There is no risk here. I guess what I'm trying to say here is legacy automotive manufacturers are still, unfortunately, living in their mum's basement and currently unemployed with absolutely no prospects whatsoever for the future. As a mining company, does it make sense to take a gamble on one of these unproven losers? Probably not, I'm just saying. And if I happen to have offended any guys watching who are mid-30s or older and still living in their mum's basement and unemployed, unless you're an extreme outlier with severe physical and or mental health issues, I'm not sorry, because you are a loser. The good news is you can change, but we just have to call a spade a spade.
The who
And while I'm spitting facts, hurting butts, and melting snowflakes, here's a pro tip for the 5 or 6% of women in the audience. Just go to the finish line and pick a winner. Find a guy who's got his shit sorted and proven it. It's much easier than gambling, taking a huge bet on a guy who has yet to prove himself.
The majority of the world's nickel is used in the stainless steel industry, though that balance is expected to shift rapidly in the coming decades.
Batteries probably making up slightly more than 10% now of total demand, which is obviously up on where we were 2 or 3 years ago, but is still a fairly small component of the market. If we go forward 10 to 15 years, the battery sector could provide more than 50% of the demand for nickel units.
But not all nickel is high quality enough for use in batteries.
Not all nickel can go into an electric vehicle battery. It needs to be what's called class 1. And that's where nickel sulfides are really important because they're the most pure nickel.
Nickel sulfide is typically found deep within the earth and is extracted via underground mines. Tamarack is one of only 2 nickel sulfide deposits in the U.S.
So there's Eagle in Michigan, and then there's Tamarack, and that's it for high-grade nickel deposits.
Currently, the U.S. sources much of its battery-grade nickel from Canada, Norway, Australia, and Finland, but production capacity is not growing at nearly the same rate as demand forecasts.
I just want to hone in a little on this point. It's absolutely true that forecasts today for future nickel demand versus the amount of nickel we'll actually have, big mismatch. Mines don't come online instantaneously. There's a multi-year wait time, sometimes closer to a decade, to actually get the materials out of a new mining project. In the coming years and throughout the decade and beyond, there will be an enormous shortfall of nickel. But here's the kicker. The experts' estimates are massively off the mark to the downside. They're massively underestimating demand for EVs and for nickel. In other words, the experts who today are rightly warning of an enormous amount of pain to come, unavoidable pain at this point in time, are actually massively underestimating just how brutal and devastating this bloodbath will be for every company in the automotive industry besides Tesla. I guess what you could say is small brain, future pain.
And since Russia is also a major supplier of high-grade nickel, the country's war in Ukraine could throw EV makers' plans into disarray. Amidst the surge in nickel prices, Tesla has already raised the price of its Model 3 and Model Y.
Russia's the world's largest producer of primary nickel products used in EVs. So if you have a game changer from here forward in the sourcing of that material, there is no possible way that they will meet those targets in the time frame which they lay out.
Phil LeBeau, super succinct there. Anchor effectively asked, hey Phil, so are these companies f***ed? Phil's response? Yep.
Additional nickel could come from laterites, though, which are a lower quality but more prevalent type of nickel deposit. These ores are found near the Earth's surface and are extracted via open pit mining. Indonesia and the Philippines mine the most laterites, while Australia and Brazil also have large reserves. The problem, though, is that upgrading low-grade nickel laterites for use in EV batteries involves extremely energy-intensive processes, such as high-pressure acid leaching, in which nickel is extracted from a laterite ore after being heated to an extremely high temperature mixed with sulfuric acid and pressurized.
The CO2 footprint would be in the order of about 15 to 20 times more than what we can do with a deposit like what you have at the Tamarack project.
We have for a long time outsourced some of this admittedly dirtier part of the economy to developing economies.
That's why many in the EV industry see developing new nickel sulfide mines domestically and in allied countries like Canada as a key goal.
Not only does it potentially bring supply closer to a North American end user, it gives that end user also the ability to say that they are using a sort of cleaner source of nickel, which is obviously good for their marketing of their product.
Right now, nickel is often mined in one country, refined or transformed into nickel sulfate in another, and sent overseas yet again for battery assembly, adding to the carbon intensity of the whole process.
For example, in Canada, we have a lot of mining, smelting and refining of nickel. But beyond that, you're going to have to export the nickel to other countries to transform that into nickel sulfate. And even if you did that, let's say to the USA, that sulfate would still have to be exported to another country to make it into a precursor or a cathode active material.
The Eagle mine in Michigan, for example, does send its nickel concentrate to Canada for smelting and refining. But from there, it just gets sold into the market, ending up anywhere from Asia to Europe or the US for use in stainless steel or batteries. And while there are plans for domestic nickel refineries in development, the US currently doesn't have any. So even if Tamarack is operational by 2026, that nickel still might get shipped around the world before ending up in American EVs. But while Tamarack won't solve all the complexities of the nickel supply chain, every additional nickel mine could help EV makers like Tesla meet their production targets, as Musk has previously stated that nickel is his biggest concern when it comes to scaling up lithium-ion battery production. Talon is particularly excited about the Tamarack project because the nickel is so high grade, which means it's less expensive, energy-intensive, and wasteful to process.
Some of our grades, we've seen up to 12% nickel, which globally is very high. Some of the highest grades I've ever seen in my career.
Though there are other areas with rich nickel sulfide deposits, particularly in Canada, Beveridge says that the high cost of sulfide mining as compared to laterite mining makes companies hesitant to invest in new projects.
The pipeline of sulfide projects has dwindled, and now we're in a situation where there's essentially not that much there.
But he predicts that Talon's supply deal with Tesla will make banks much more likely to finance the Tamarack project.
So it's an indirect means of incentivizing that project. By guaranteeing demand for a product, you make that project look far more attractive in terms of from a finance perspective.
Talon's development partner, mining giant Rio Tinto, is also exploring how it could sequester carbon on-site by injecting captured CO2 into the surrounding rocks, permanently storing it underground.
The rocks that we have here at Tamarack are chemically amenable to turning that CO2 into a carbon mineral and essentially locking it underground as a mineral, as a stable form for eternity. Rio Tinto and the Department of Energy have funded a total of $6.2 million to study that at Tamarack.
While it's very much still in the exploratory phase, carbon sequestration could effectively make Talon's operations carbon neutral or even negative, or help to offset the emissions from other industries. Talon hopes to start the environmental review process by the end of this year or early next, at which point the public will have access to the information that Maccabee wants. It's also no guarantee that Tesla will even end up sourcing nickel from Tamarack, because it can walk away from the deal if the mine isn't up and running by 2026. And that's an ambitious target.
It was a good deal earlier than would be possible, feasible in our view, for permitting approval and construction.
Garner thinks it's likely that the deal won't pan out, but he believes battery recycling, as opposed to mining, could provide a more fruitful and sustainable supply of nickel anyway, pointing to battery recycling companies like Li-Cycle, which has a partnership with General Motors and is also building out a domestic nickel refinery in Rochester, New York, and Redwood Materials, which is partnering with Ford, Volvo, Nissan, and Panasonic, Tesla's battery supplier.
There are at least 5 or 6 companies within the USA alone, each of whom have their own proprietary technologies, but they will give the end result of nickel sulfate or a precursor and cathode active material ready-made within the USA. I can see that coming out by the middle of this decade. Will it be sufficient to cover off total EV demand? I doubt it, but it is in tandem with the traditional technologies that are available and used today.
That is, even as battery recycling ramps up and gets cheaper, mining for nickel is still going to be a part of the equation. Today, it's usually the more economical option. Though as surging EV demand drives up prices for battery minerals, recycling will become more cost competitive. Plus, Gardner says that recycling plants can be built and scaled much more quickly than the average mine.
You're looking at 8 to 10 to 12 years before a new mine can be developed.
8, 10, 12 years for a mine to get up and running. This is a perfect opportunity to remind everybody, 2014, almost a decade ago, Tesla knowing they're going to need a shitload of batteries, a shitload of materials, and they need to take their destiny into their own hands. Half a decade or so later, Tesla's Battery Investor Day, taking production of cells into their own hands as well. This is why legacy automotive manufacturers and EV startups are so completely and utterly fucked. Unless they were planning on producing hundreds of thousands, then millions of electric vehicles per year a decade ago and looking into the future, they will not be able to access the necessary materials. Tesla has been making moves in this 4D game of chess for the last decade while everyone else was asleep at the wheel.
And we just don't have that time.
No amount of capital can create new nickel mines by 2024. And yet, just last week, what did Ford say? Ford said that it plans to increase the number of EVs it has in production on an annual basis to 2 million per year by 2026.
Press F in the chat for Ford.
I see a lot more joint ventures between the automakers and the cell manufacturers and cell recyclers. I see those coming on within the next 4 or 5 years, and that would provide them with an awful lot of their nickel units required, and in a much more sustainable way.
Wood Mackenzie predicts that global demand for refined nickel will grow from about 3 million metric tons in 2022 to about 5.8 million metric tons by 2040, driven by the EV battery sector. Taking into account the exhaustion of current reserves, new mining projects, and the role of battery recycling, Wood Mackenzie forecasts a shortfall of 1.8 million metric tons of nickel. So while Beveridge imagines that many EV makers will be interested in sourcing nickel from the less carbon-intensive sulfide mines, there's just not enough supply there to go around.
Everybody's going to want to source their units from Canada and Australia. Not everybody is going to be able to do that because there's simply a limited amount of units out there. So then it comes back to economics, I think.
That is to say, laterite mines are cheaper, and they're the ones that are expanding right now, especially in Indonesia. Beveridge believes that building more sulfide mines could require automakers to enter into risk-sharing agreements with miners, and that might not happen unless there's actually legislation to incentivize greener mining practices.
You really look to see a change when some concrete measures come into place which, let's say, potentially penalise an OEM for using a material in their supply chain that is particularly carbon intensive, let's say.
And while mining of any sort often faces backlash in the communities that it affects, Talon says that mining technology has come a long way in the past few decades.
I think that there's a really negative stigma associated with mining in general, but this is the 21st century. We've got to be able to do this right. And I think that we have a really good opportunity here to show people just how you can protect the environment and protect the water quality.
But if Talon does face community pushback and delays during its environmental review, that could end up voiding its deal with Tesla. Overall, the controversy and the costs surrounding new mines are a reason why many are more excited by alternatives.
Water Legacy doesn't have a position that there should never be a sulfide mine. We do believe that we should be looking at things holistically. Are there things we can do in terms of lesser consumption, greater efficiency, greater recycling in addition to mining?
As is so often the case, it's not an either-or situation. It's likely going to take more recycling combined with more nickel mining to ramp up lithium-ion battery production in tandem with EV demand. It remains to be seen how great a role each technology will ultimately play in the nickel supply chain, but if Tamarack does prove to be environmentally safe, it could definitely be a part of the solution.
I'd like for our teams to be able to say that we found it, we developed it, we have contributed to environmentally friendly, social, responsible metals, and that it's driving our vehicles, and that metals are going to be recycled into the next battery and the next battery. So I'll be long gone and these metals will still be alive.
Definitely a fair point. Over the longer term, we'll no longer need to mine raw materials from the earth for use in batteries because there'll be enough batteries with the right materials in them in circulation in the world coming back in for recycling that they can be recycled. For those who don't know, generally speaking, the recovery rate, the yield from recycling batteries is incredibly high. 95, 96, 97% of the original raw materials in a battery that come in for recycling end up available at the end of the recycling process. There's very little loss. But unfortunately, we're probably at least a decade or two away from this point, maybe even longer. And until we get there, mining materials will be a necessity. And for anyone requiring said materials, so too will be locking in extremely long-term supply contracts. You know, like Tesla, and literally no one else has been doing. It seems evident from where I'm standing today that outside of a few exceptions within China, of all the companies today claiming they plan to produce EVs in the future, or actually producing EVs today, Tesla is the only company that both had a brain and used it. As a consequence, the rest of this decade is going to be an absolute fucking bloodbath. Don't say I didn't warn you. You did it, Mary. You led your company to imminent bankruptcy. You fucking idiot. It's not that I'm trying to unfairly single out or pick on Mary B. Aspara of Government Motors after all. She's equally as incompetent as every other automotive CEO, right? They all fucked up. They all failed to recognise what would happen with the automotive industry, despite the obvious signs going back more than a decade and a half. Not even kidding. It's just that in addition to this gigantic, colossal fuck up, Mary also happened to preside over the company when they embarrassingly announced a partnership with what at the time was obviously a fraudulent company with fake products trying to pump up their stock price to lure in dumb retail investors, allegedly, in my opinion, do your own research, blah, fucking blah, 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 which of course would be Nikola Motor Corporation. Shout out to Trevor Meltdown Milton. When's your trial? A couple of weeks, maybe it's a few days away. Enjoy your freedom while it lasts, my friend. By the way, I never did go clean that beach. And it's not like she was also presiding over the company when just a few months later they also announced another partnership with another obvious scam of a company, allegedly, in my opinion, do your own research, blah, fucking blah, 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 Fraudstown Motors. And we all know how that one ended as well. It just so happens, it's just that Mary's was the first name to come to mind. But let me be clear, all CEOs of all legacy automotive manufacturers have completely screwed up, have not locked in long-term supply contracts for materials, parts, or anything, and they will not be able to deliver on their EV promises. You can count on it. In conclusion, rest in peace, the entire legacy automotive industry and almost every EV startup. 95% of you will no longer be in business at the end of the decade. And just finally, don't forget you can sign up to Patreon with the card in the corner or the link in the pinned comment. You'll instantly gain access to over 100 exclusive Q&A videos on all kinds of topics, plus instant access to my up-to-date Tesla stock price targets all the way out until 2031 in the bear case, the base case, the bull case, and the hyper bull case. So I'll see you over there. I'm Stephen Mark Ryan. This is Solving the Money Problem, and I love you all. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoy these videos, there's a bunch of ways you can support the channel, access exclusive content and perks, and get some free stocks and crypto. Check out the links in the pinned comment below. You can get 2 free stocks with Webull, a free stock with Stake, free Bitcoin with Coinbase, and free Bitcoin with BlockFi, and the BlockFi Bitcoin Rewards credit card. You can also pick up some Tesla, Elon, and investment themed merch in the merch store. If you want to take it to the next level, join thousands of members on Patreon to gain exclusive access to over 100 Q&A videos, loads of exclusive content, exclusive access to my up-to-date 10-year Tesla stock price targets, and even access my Tesla valuation model at the investor support level and above. So check out the links in the pinned comment below, and thanks for your support. And if you're still watching, you're awesome. I read every single comment on this channel and I really appreciate your feedback. So if you've got any thoughts on today's video, questions, comments, or suggestions for a new video, let me know in the comments below. Check the cards on screen now to browse the merch store, join Patreon, or watch the next video.